It's kind of surprising, isn't it? Raising frogs, raniculture, they call it,
Hmm?
seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but it actually has these really significant links to environmental health.
Absolutely it does.
Yeah.
And, believe it or not, how well these frog farms do, how sustainable they are, it often really boils down to one crucial thing.
Let me guess. Water.
Water quality, exactly. That's the core of it.
Okay.
So, for this deep dive, we've really dug into the scientific research looking at, well, what are the critical things you need to monitor in the water for frog farming?
Oh,
And just as important, how do you manage the wastewater, the effluent that comes out of these places?
right. And for you listening, our learner, we promise we're not going to drown you in complex jargon here.
No, definitely not.
The idea is to pull out the key insights, those kind of aha moments, and give you a clear, engaging look at this surprisingly complex topic.
Think of it as getting you up to speed quickly on something that's actually becoming more and more relevant. Frog farming, it's growing globally.
Brazil, especially, right? I read they're a big producer of bullfrogs.
They are a leader, in fact. But with that growth, naturally come challenges, particularly around water, using it responsibly and dealing with that effluent.
Okay, so let's start right there. Why is the water quality so critical for the frogs themselves? What's going on in those tanks?
Well, fundamentally, they live in it. They excrete waste directly into the water. They shed their skin in there.
Ah, okay. Didn't think about the skin shedding.
Yeah, that adds organic matter too. So if that water isn't renewed regularly and the tanks aren't kept clean, you're basically creating a perfect breeding ground for diseases.
Which leads to higher mortality rates, I imagine.
Exactly. It's not just about looking clean. It's fundamentally about keeping the frogs healthy and alive.
Makes sense.
And bullfrogs, the ones commonly farmed, they have pretty specific needs. Physical needs, chemical needs in terms of their water quality, especially for breeding and for the tadpoles to grow well.
So producers really need to get this right from the start before they even build the farm.
Ideally, yes. You need a good handle on your water source and what parameters you need to maintain. It's like testing your soil before planting a garden.
Good analogy. If the water's wrong, nothing else is likely to succeed.
Precisely.
Mm.
And you have to remember, even in a small tank, it's an ecosystem. All these factors dissolved, oxygen, temperature, pH, even atmospheric pressure. They're all interconnected. They influence each other.
Okay, that interconnectedness is interesting. You mentioned temperature. I think the research pointed to a specific range for tadpoles.
Yes, it did. For tadpole development, the sweet spot seems to be between 22 and 28 degrees Celsius.
22 to 28 C.
Okay, that range really impacts how fast they grow, their survival rates.
Yeah.
It's critical in those early stages.
So it's like a recipe, almost. They don't just need water. They need water with very specific ingredients and conditions.
That's a good way to put it.
What are the key ingredients then? What do farmers absolutely need to measure?
The research highlights a checklist. You've got pH, that's the acidity or alkalinity. Electrical conductivity tells you about the dissolved stuff in the water. Total alkalinity and total hardness, those relate to its buffering capacity and mineral content.
Buffering, meaning it resists pH changes.
Exactly. Keeps things stable. Then there are the nitrogen compounds. Ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. Very important. Plus phosphorus, chlorides, iron, and maybe the biggest one, dissolved oxygen.
Wow, okay. That is quite a list. Sounds more like lab work than farming sometimes.
It can be. Proper management requires that level of attention.
So let's pull back a bit to the bigger picture. You mentioned earlier water usage and the wastewater, the effluent. What's the general context there?
Well, aquaculture in general, frog farming included, has grown massively. And that means it's competing more for water resources.
Right, with agriculture, industry, us.
Exactly. Though some experts make an interesting distinction for frog farming. They argue it primarily uses water rather than consuming it in the way, say, irrigation does. The water flows through.
Ah, that's a subtle but potentially important point for regulation, maybe.
It could be. But regardless, the quality of the water leaving the farm is becoming a huge focus.
Because it goes back into the environment.
Right. Regulators are increasingly looking at things like BOD, that's biochemical oxygen demand, how much oxygen the effluent uses up, and definitely the levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. This can even affect permits and fees for water use.
You mentioned some global water use stats earlier. Agriculture using the most.
Yeah, globally, agriculture is the big one, around 70%. Industry is about 20%. And direct human consumption, homes and cities, less than 10%. Aquaculture is a growing slice of that pie, partly because people want healthy food that's, seen as ecologically sound.
That drive for environmentally responsible food is huge now.
It really is. And ideally, modern aquaculture tries to balance three pillars: profitable production, social development for communities, and environmental preservation.
But achieving that balance isn't always easy. Aquaculture can have negative impacts.
Oh, absolutely. Like any large-scale food production. Potential downsides include, well, deforestation for ponds, diverting natural water courses, sometimes introducing non-native species.
And the effluent, the wastewater discharge we've been talking about.
Exactly, that's a major one.
Oh.
These impacts can be felt right on the farm, locally, or even regionally.
How does frog farm wastewater compare to, say, municipal sewage? You mentioned a difference.
Yeah, typically aquaculture effluent, like from frog ponds, is characterized by high volumes but relatively low concentrations of nutrients.
Compared to domestic sewage, which is the opposite, lower volume, higher concentration.
Correct. But don't let the low concentration fool you. Because the volume is high and the discharge can be continuous, it can still lead to problems over time.
Like a slow, steady trickle of nutrients causing issues.
Precisely. It can lead to chronic bioaccumulation of substances in the receiving waters and significantly eutrophication.
Eutrophication, that's the overfertilization of water, right? Leading to algal blooms.
Exactly. Those blooms then die, decompose, and suck up all the oxygen, harming fish and other aquatic life.
And it's not just the frog's natural waste. Is it sometimes chemicals get into the water too?
That can happen. In some aquaculture practices, you might find residues from disinfectants, pest control agents, medications for diseases, maybe even hormones or anesthetics in specific situations. These can end up in the effluent.
Okay, it's a complex picture with potential downsides, but you also mentioned positive aspects of sustainable aquaculture.
Yes, definitely. When it's managed well, it can integrate with agriculture. You can raise multiple species together, like frogs and ornamental fish, perhaps. Create systems that also support recreation or tourism. It can help maintain wild fish stocks by reducing pressure on them, sometimes use treated wastewater from other sources.
Integrating with hydroponics, maybe? Growing plants without soil?
That's another possibility. And creating jobs, of course. It's about finding smart, integrated approaches.
And a key part of that is minimizing waste, right?
Yeah.
Especially nutrient waste.
Absolutely. Across all animal agriculture, reducing nitrogen excretion is a big focus for environmental sustainability. For frogs, that means developing feeds they can digest and utilize really efficiently.
Better feed means less waste in the water.
Exactly. More digestible, more palatable feed minimizes the nutrients going straight through the animal and into the environment.
And you also mentioned frog farming itself is seen as an alternative food source.
Yes, particularly as wild frog populations, especially in parts of Asia, have declined due to pollution, habitat loss, and overharvesting. Farming offers an alternative source of frog meat.
Okay, so we've established water quality is vital across aquaculture. Let's zoom back in specifically on raniculture. Reiterate for us, why is it so crucial there?
Well, as we said, they live in it, they shed skin, they excrete waste. It's a constant challenge to maintain water purity. High-quality water is absolutely fundamental to preventing disease outbreaks and minimizing mortality.
And those key parameters we listed, pH, oxygen, ammonia, etc., need constant watching.
Constant monitoring. pH, conductivity, alkalinity, hardness, ammonia, nitrate, phosphorus, chlorides, iron, and especially oxygen. You need to know what's happening with these.
The oxygen point seems particularly critical. You mentioned pollution using it up.
It really is. When you have a lot of organic waste, uneaten food, feces, shed skin.
The bacteria that break this down consume oxygen. Aerobic bacteria, the ones using oxygen.
And if they use it faster, then it can dissolve back into the water from the air.
The dissolved oxygen level drops. If it drops too low, the frogs can't get enough oxygen to breathe, essentially. And if it gets really bad, you reach anaerobic conditions, no oxygen.
And that's when different bacteria take over, the anaerobic one.
Right. And while they still break down waste, they produce nasty byproducts, like hydrogen sulfide gas, that rotten egg smell. It's toxic to aquatic life.
So it's a vicious cycle. Waste leads to low oxygen, which favors bacteria that produce more harmful substances.
You've got it. And remember that interconnectedness. Temperature affects oxygen solubility.
Right. Colder water holds more oxygen. You gave some figures. Yeah, near sea level, water at 20 degrees C holds about 9.08 milligrams per liter of oxygen. Cool it to 15 degrees C, and it can hold about 10.07. It shows you can't just look at one parameter in isolation.
It really is a delicate balancing act. Okay, let's dive even deeper into some of these key variables. Start with pH. Remind us what that is.
Sure, pH, potential of hydrogen. It's the measure of acidity or alkalinity. It reflects the balance of hydrogen ions, H+, plus,
No.
and hydroxide ions. Scale of 0 to 14, 7 is neutral, below 7 is acidic, above 7 is alkaline or basic.
And what causes pH to change in a frog pond?
A major factor is carbon dioxide dissolving in water, which forms carbonic acid. Phytoplankton, the microscopic plants, play a role here through photosynthesis and respiration affecting CO2 levels. High CO2 can lower the pH, making it more acidic.
Okay. Next up, electrical conductivity. What's that measuring?
Conductivity measures the water's ability to conduct an electrical current. This depends on the concentration of dissolved substances that form ions-charged particles.
So more dissolved salts and minerals mean higher conductivity.
Generally, yes. Higher conductivity indicates more dissolved ions are present in the system, gives you a sense of the total dissolved solids.
Got it. What about total alkalinity? You mentioned buffering.
Right. Alkalinity is mainly about the concentration of carbonate and bicarbonate salts. Its key function is buffering, resisting changes in pH. It neutralizes acids, like that carbonic acid we mentioned, keeping the pH more stable. It's also important for things like shell formation in some invertebrates.
So like a chemical shock absorber for pH swings and total hardness.
Hardness primarily measures dissolved calcium and magnesium ions, usually expressed as calcium carbonate equivalent. It often correlates with alkalinity. High hardness can sometimes increase the toxicity of certain chemicals or metals to aquatic life.
Interesting link to toxicity there.
Okay, the nitrogen cycle components. Ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, these sound chemically complex.
They are part of a crucial cycle. Ammonia, NH3, is the main nitrogen waste product from the frogs, and it also comes from decomposing organic matter. It's toxic, especially the NH3 form, which is more prevalent at higher pH and temperature. So the frogs themselves produce this toxic substance.
Yes, but then beneficial bacteria step in. First, Nitrosomonas bacteria convert ammonia to nitrite, NO2.
Is nitrite bad?
Yes, nitrite is also quite toxic to aquatic animals. It interferes with oxygen transport in their blood.
Okay, so ammonia becomes toxic nitrite? Then what?
Then another group of bacteria, Nitrobacter, converts the toxic nitrite into nitrate, NO3. Nitrate is much less toxic, generally only a problem at very high concentrations.
Q. So the bacteria detoxify the water in a way.
Exactly. It's called nitrification. And there's even denitrification, where other bacteria can convert nitrate back to harmless nitrogen gas, which bubbles out. But the key is having those beneficial bacteria colonies established and working properly. If that cycle breaks down, ammonia or nitrate can build up rapidly.
A delicate biological balance then? What
Yeah.
about phosphorus?
Phosphorus is usually present in lower concentrations than nitrogen, but it's essential for life. Key component of DNA, RNA, and energy molecules like ATP. Phytoplankton need it. Main sources in aquaculture are excess feed and waste decomposition. Sewage is also a major source in general aquatic pollution.
And finally, iron. You flagged that as a potential issue.
Yes, high iron levels can be a real problem, particularly in groundwater sources used for some farms. It can be directly toxic to tadpoles. The good news is it can often be removed by aeration, bubbling air through the water. This oxidizes the iron, making it precipitate out as solid particles that can be filtered.
Okay, that's a fantastic breakdown of the key water chemistry. Now, let's look at what researchers actually see on commercial tadpole farms, particularly drawing on studies from Brazil.
Right, those Brazilian studies give us some valuable real-world data. One interesting finding is that generally water conditions good for fish farming also tend to work well for amphibians like bullfrogs.
That's convenient. Any differences?
One observation is that bullfrog tadpoles seem to tolerate slightly lower dissolved oxygen levels than many fish species.
Oh, why might that be?
It's possibly related to their generally more sedentary homebody behavior compared to more active fish. They might be adapted to environments where oxygen can fluctuate a bit more.
That's fascinating. Makes sense of their behavior. What about production rates and temperature?
They definitely see higher tadpole production during warmer months. An average temperature around 26 degrees Celsius seems optimal for growth and adaptation in those systems.
And pH, does it stay fairly steady?
Yes, the pH values reported are usually quite stable, averaging around 7.0, neutral, for both the incoming water and the effluent. That's well within the recommended range in Brazil, which is 6.0 to 9.0.
Okay. What about dissolved oxygen levels on these farms? Does it drop significantly in the effluent?
It typically does decrease in the effluent compared to the inflow, which is expected due to respiration and decomposition. But ideally, it needs to stay above the legal minimum, which is 5.0 milligrams per liter in Brazil.
And water renewal. How often do they change the water?
The general recommendation for smaller tanks is a complete water exchange at least once daily. Studies measured flow rates through farms ranging from about 0.06 up to 0.11 liters per second.
Okay. What about electrical conductivity in practice?
There aren't specific legal limits for tadpoles there, but observed values in inflow and runoff water are typically between 30 and 200 microsiemens per centimeter. For comparison, fish nurseries might see 46 to 113. High values can suggest a lot of decomposition. Very low values might indicate high primary production by phytoplankton using up dissolved substances.
So it's an indicator of the overall dissolved stuff and biological activity.
Pretty much. Then there's turbidity, the cloudiness.
Right. Limits on that.
Brazilian regs set a maximum of 100 NTU for effluent. Tadpole farm studies generally show much lower levels, maybe 20 NTU in, 26 NTU out. High turbidity is usually caused by suspended clay or organic particles.
And the nitrogen compounds ammonia and nitrate on real farms.
Levels usually stay below the legal limits in the studies we looked at. But importantly, concentrations tend to be higher in the outlet water compared to the inlet.
Showing that waste breakdown and nitrification process is definitely happening.
Exactly. That conversion of ammonia to nitrate is active, especially in well-oxygenated tanks.
It really paints a picture of dynamic systems, even in these tanks. Let's shift now to the effluent itself, its overall quality, and the microbial side of things.
Okay. A major concern, echoing the general aquaculture issue, is eutrophication risk driven by excess nutrients, often linked to feed management.
Right, uneaten feed or poorly digested feed.
Precisely. We need more studies looking specifically at the ecological characteristics of this frog farm effluent to understand its impact better. The feed itself is a factor. Often high-protein fish feed is used, around 45% protein.
But frogs don't use it as efficiently as fish.
Bullfrogs, especially in the common Anfragrangia system in Brazil, seem to have lower protein efficiency. So a significant portion of those nutrients, especially nitrogen from the protein, ends up wasted in the water.
Worsening the effluent quality.
Directly. Managing ammonia, which comes from protein breakdown, is key. That involves controlling feed quantity and quality and ensuring adequate water flow. And, of course, avoiding things like nitrogen fertilizers if they were ever considered.
So formulating frog-specific feeds that minimize indigestible components, including phosphorus, is important.
Critically important. Better feed utilization equals less waste, equals lower eutrophication risk. It's a direct link.
What about the frog's health and the microbes in the water? Any specific concerns?
Well, any imbalance in the aquatic system can make the animals more susceptible to disease. Frogs, being amphibians, can carry various pathogens.
Like bacteria.
Yes. Studies have actually identified Escherichia coli, or E. coli, in diseased frogs. Worryingly, very high levels were found in pig manure that was sometimes used historically as feed for larvae.
Wow, okay. E. coli is usually an indicator of.
Fecal contamination. Exactly. And it's been found in various aquatic products, not just frogs. Other related bacteria, coliforms, can also come from soil, decaying vegetation, or even handlers if hygiene isn't strict.
So it's not just from manure.
No. And there's evidence that young frogs undergoing metamorphosis or infected individuals can shed pathogens, potentially contaminating the water and other frogs. Adult bullfrogs in stagnant water can also harbor E. coli.
And metamorphosis is a stressful time for them, isn't it? Immune system might be weaker.
Very much so. Reduced immunocompetence during metamorphosis makes them more vulnerable. Plus, E. coli can survive for quite a while. In river water studies show up to 27 days. This suggests farm bullfrogs could potentially act as reservoirs, spilling E. coli into the environment.
That's a significant potential pathway for contamination. You mentioned comparing effluents from different types of aquaculture.
Yes, looking at various factors, including microbial loads. Some studies comparing fish, shrimp, and tadpole farms found, for instance, significantly higher E. coli levels in certain fish farm effluents compared to the tadpole farms in that specific comparison.
So while frog farming has microbial risks, they aren't necessarily unique or always worse than other forms of aquaculture.
It depends on the specific farm, management practices, and local conditions. Each type has its challenges.
Okay, interesting. Let's switch gears slightly. We've talked a lot about ponds and tanks, but some frog farming happens on land, right? In more terrestrial setups?
That's right. But even in those systems, water is absolutely crucial. Frogs rely on water for waste elimination, maintaining posture, respiration through their skin, reproduction protection. They are still fundamentally tied to water.
So water quality is still paramount, even if they aren't fully submerged all the time.
Definitely. They need access to good quality water. free from fecal coliforms, heavy metals, ideally low in iron, with a neutral pH. Spring or artesian well water is often preferred.
And temperature. Still important.
Yes, ambient temperature matters because they're ectothermic, cold-blooded. Warmer temperatures generally support better metabolic function. But the water source itself needs to be clean and stable.
What are the best practices for managing water in these land-based systems?
Protecting the water source from pollution is key. Regular cleaning of any reservoirs or tanks. Considering the local hydrology, where does the water come from, where does it go? Using water rationally. Being mindful of ecologically sensitive areas nearby.
How much water do these systems use?
It varies, but one study gave an example of needing half a liter per second for a 500 square meter farm. That adds up to over 43,000 liters a day.
A significant amount. And the effluent still needs treatment.
Absolutely. Any wastewater generated must be treated before discharge. Efforts should also focus on feed efficiency to minimize waste in the first place, plus good preventative sanitary management and sustainable stocking densities.
What are the main environmental impacts specific to these terrestrial systems? Still waste-related.
Primarily, yes. Degradation of uneaten feed releases nitrogen and phosphorus. Urea excretion adds ammonia. Shed skin adds organic matter. And the nitrification process needed to break down the ammonia consumes dissolved oxygen in whatever water is present.
So, similar issues, just perhaps manifesting slightly differently than in a pond. Good overall management is key.
It's essential. Technical knowledge, suitable location, reliable water quality and quantity, trained staff, sound economic planning, all vital. Interestingly, even with good management, some comparative studies suggest frog culture effluent can have higher dissolved nutrients, phosphorus, ammonia, and conductivity than typical fish or shrimp effluent.
Even with good practices.
That's what some data indicates. However, positive changes within frog ponds over time with good management have also been observed. But the potential for eutrophication from the effluent seems consistently higher compared to fish or shrimp.
Which really underscores the need for best aquaculture practices, or BAPs, specifically tailored for frog culture.
Exactly. And constant water renewal, while necessary to prevent toxicity buildup within the farm, can mean higher overall nutrient loads being discharged from the farm.
It's a trade-off.
It is. Management strategies focus on balancing flow rates and frog density, and crucially, improving feed management to reduce the initial waste load. Comparing different systems often highlights these higher ammonia and phosphorus levels in bullfrog effluent.
Okay, so managing that nutrient-rich effluent is clearly a top priority. Let's talk about a specific treatment solution. Constructed wetlands.
Right. Constructed wetlands are essentially engineered systems that mimic natural wetlands to treat wastewater. They're proving very effective for aquaculture effluent.
How do they work? What's happening inside them?
They use aquatic plants, soil or gravel media, and microorganisms working together. The plants act as biofilters, their roots provide surfaces for bacteria, and they take up nutrients. Physical processes like sedimentation happen, plus chemical and biological transformations.
Like a natural water treatment plant?
Pretty much. It's a combination of physical settling, chemical precipitation and adsorption, and biological uptake and transformation by plants and microbes. This is really important in places like Brazil, where direct discharge into rivers is common.
How effective are they at removing those key problem nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus?
Quite effective. Nitrogen is removed through plant and microbial uptake, and importantly, nitrification and denitrification processes happen within the wetland, often aided by oxygen transported down to the roots by the plants themselves.
Ah, the plants help oxygenate the root zone.
Some species do, yes, through specialized tissues called parenchyma. Phosphorus removal involves uptake by plants and microbes, but also sedimentation, adsorption onto the substrate particles, and chemical precipitation.
Does it matter what plants you use?
Yes, efficiency depends on factors like water flow rate, how long the water stays in the wetland, retention time, and the specific macrophyte species. Plants like Cypress giganteus, Typhodomengensis cattails, and especially Eichhornia crassipes, water hyacinth, have shown good results in warmer regions. Water hyacinth in particular can be very effective at removing nitrogen and phosphorus.
What about the bacteria we talked about earlier, like coliforms? Do wetlands help with those?
Yes, they do. Removal happens through physical filtration and sedimentation, chemical processes like oxidation and adsorption onto surfaces, and various biological mechanisms, predation by other organisms, natural die-off, even antibiotic effects from some plants or microbes.
Sounds like a really holistic and sustainable approach.
It really can be. It addresses water quality, reduces eutrophication risk, and remember, nitrogen and phosphorus aren't inherently bad. They're essential nutrients. Wetlands help manage their levels. This kind of biofiltration is gaining traction globally.
Are they expensive to build or run?
The choice of treatment depends on economics, local regulations, and the specific farm. But constructed wetlands can be cost competitive with traditional methods like stabilization ponds. Plus, the treated water might be reusable for irrigation, and harvested wetland plants can sometimes be used as fertilizer. It promotes a more circular approach.
So how specifically are wetlands being applied or studied for frog farm effluent, given its characteristics?
Well, recognizing that raniculture uses large water volumes and produces effluent with high organic and nutrient loads, there's growing interest in using constructed wetlands for it, especially in Brazil.
Because the effluent is particularly challenging.
Yes, typically higher nutrients, ammonia, phosphorus, higher conductivity, and often lower dissolved oxygen compared to fish or shrimp effluent. Wetlands offer that relatively low-cost, versatile way to tackle these issues.
Are there specific studies on this application?
They are still relatively scarce compared to studies on fish farm effluent, but they exist. The goal is always to prevent the degradation of the receiving waters. One key study we looked at was by Borges and Sepulveda.
What did they do in that study?
They set up a specific constructed wetland to treat effluent from a commercial bullfrog fattening unit. It was about 14 square meters, holding just over 2 cubic meters of water.
What was the design?
It had 3 stages. First, a sedimentation box to let solids settle out. Second, a section planted with water hyacinth, Icornia crassipes. And third, a section with cattails, Typhodomingensis, and giant sedge, Cypress giganteus.
And they monitored it under different conditions.
Yes, they look at 2 phases. One, during a period of high frog biomass, lots of frogs, lots of waste, and another with lower biomass.
What were the key findings? Did it work?
It did show significant improvements. In both phases, one consistent finding was an increase in dissolved oxygen in the water leaving the wetland compared to the water entering. That's a positive sign.
So it was reoxygenating the water. What about nutrients and other factors?
During the high biomass phase, the incoming water had higher turbidity, nitrate, nitrite, suspended solids, and coliform bacteria counts. The outgoing water had higher pH and DO. During the lower biomass phase, the pattern was similar for turbidity, nitrite, nitrate solids, and coliforms being higher at the inlet, but this time ammonia was higher at the outlet, while DO was still higher at the outlet.
Ammonia higher at the outlet sometimes.
Yes, nitrification might have been less complete, or perhaps ammonification within the wetland itself was dominant during that phase. But overall, comparing inlet and outlet across various parameters like total phosphorus, BOD, chlorophyll, the system achieved significant wastewater quality improvement.
So the conclusion was positive.
Yes, the researchers suggested the treatment was adequate for the commercial farm context, though maybe some adjustments, like managing the harvested plant biomass, could further optimize nutrient removal. It definitely shows promise.
That's really encouraging news for sustainable frog farming. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the final thoughts?
Well, it's clear that raniculture, like all aquaculture, faces challenges related to water, both availability and maintaining quality. It impacts the natural sources and the receiving waters.
And there's still more to learn specifically about frog systems compared to, say, fish farming.
Definitely. There's less research overall. We don't yet have a complete grasp of how these farm ecosystems function internally, the complex interplay of all the biotic and abiotic factors.
Yep.
Water quality can change rapidly due to disturbances, posing risks.
So future research needs to keep digging into these dynamics.
Exactly. We need studies that explain how different aquaculture systems function environmentally to develop practices that are both highly productive and genuinely sustainable.
Okay, so let's summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive for everyone listening.
I'd say number 1 is the absolute critical importance of specific water quality parameters, oxygen, pH, nitrogen compounds, etc., for successful frog farming. Get those wrong, and the system fails.
Second, the potential environmental impacts of the effluent, especially from frog culture, which can be high in nutrients, leading to risks like eutrophication.
And third, the promising role of treatment systems like constructed wetlands in mitigating those impacts and improving sustainability.
And perhaps the underlying aha moment is just how complex the water quality needs and interactions are, even in what seems like a simple frog farm.
Absolutely. It's far from simple pond water. Understanding this is vital if aquaculture, including frog farming, is going to grow sustainably and responsibly without harming the environment we all depend on.
Right. So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Consider the broader picture. How does this detailed look at water quality and frog farming make you think about water management and other food production systems? How connected are all these human activities to the health of our rivers, lakes, and oceans? What further questions does this raise for you about our relationship with water and how we produce our food?